Okay, now we're starting. Yes, so thanks for being here, Nick. Thanks for your time now. Yeah, I already gave you an overview of the server. It is now we're interested in having some conversations with guests that have interesting profiles like yours. And yeah, well, if we have an audience, I will briefly introduce you, but I will like that you introduce yourself as well. So you are a biologist who did, if I'm not wrong, cancer research and epigenetics for your PhD, and now you're a science writer in Switzerland, and you're also famously known in the internet for science cartoons that are full of comedy. Yeah. So yeah, would you like to introduce yourself a bit more?
Yeah, I mean that kind of covers it, except that I actually did work on I worked on neurodegeneration on Alzheimer's disease for my PhD, and the cancer epigenetics was on my postdoc. So that abrupt shift in the field of study was also the sort of like, let's say, the beginning of the end for my research career, which I think lasted longer than maybe it should have. But anyway, you know, everybody has different skills. I guess the lab wasn't mine. But other than that, yes, you're right. I draw comics. When my research career finished, I found it cathartic to use some humor to start not making fun so much as highlighting the absurdities of the academic world, in which I'd been part of for over a decade. And I started this web comic. I was also unemployed at the time, so I had plenty of time. And I started this comic about 10 years ago now, called The Upton Microscope. And I was surprised as to how it resonated with people very quickly. Suddenly I was, I went from a couple of dozen people sort of reading it to several thousands at some point. And it was weird. I'd never thought that random doodles on the internet were going to actually resonate with people, but it really presented me with a new format to speak and to highlight things. And I've been doing that at a lower frequency since then. I'm now grown up. I've got children and jobs and all that, so I don't actually have the time to draw as much as I would like to. I am trying to get back into it though. Now as a job, I work as a science writer for EPFL. That is one of the two Swiss federal institutions in Lausanne, so down in the French part of Switzerland, and I've been there since 2013. I've been covering research in math, physics, chemistry, and the life sciences. Not math so much anymore, but mostly physics, chemistry, and the life sciences, and it keeps me busy. Yeah, I started working part-time, and now, well, I don't know if there's such a thing as more than full-time, but yes, that's pretty much how it feels sometimes. So yeah, that's me.
So you started, as a personal project, side project with the comics, but also I find those comics like science communication. You're also showing how science works, like behind the scenes, like what the frustrations are, like how the whole interaction is with peers and with supervisors, and I think that's I appreciate that as knowing also how this works. I think that I guess everyone that likes your comics appreciates that as well. Yeah. So now you're doing.
I do get some hate mail occasionally. There's always somebody who gets offended or you're distorting reality too much. You're misrepresenting things. But it's a web comic. It's meant to go a bit far, but I wouldn't say that everybody likes it. There are people who will write and complain to me that I'm discouraging people from pursuing PhDs and things like that. My answer is usually, if you're making life decisions based on a webcomic, then you really have to rethink how you make life decisions. And that's usually the line I use, because I do get emails from people saying, oh, I was going to do a PhD, but I decided not to after reading your comics. Like, if a comic convinced you not to pursue a career in research, then you really weren't going to pursue it. That's not it. Nonetheless, I appreciate that they do have an impact, and I get a lot of love, which is nice always to get love on the internet, because it can be a rough place. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree also with what you're saying. It has multiple effects or different types of consequences, just one piece of art basically. So so something else that one of our users asks to break the ice, which is very controversial, I guess. Maybe not to break the ice, I don't know. Bonhomme asks, Lac de Genève or Lac Le Mans?
Okay. So the locals here call it Lac Le Mans, and then they'll translate it into English as Lemanic region. Sorry, there's also Lemanic centers. In English, it's Lake Geneva. Nobody knows, none of the English speakers, unless they've lived here, know what Le Mans means. But the locals will call it Le Mans. If you call it Lac de Genève, I think much fewer people will understand what you're talking about. Also, they might take offense, since Geneva is only one part of the lake, and then you've got an entire host of cities, of towns and cities around it. So they might not like it. So I had to get used to that term, Lemanic center, which sounds like a pathology, rather than Lemanic region, Lemanic area, Lemanic centers, and all that. So yeah, I would say if you're speaking French, it's Lac Le Mans. If you speak in English, it's Lake Geneva.
Okay.
I don't know in German what they call it. I don't know in German.
I don't know either. Yeah, I don't know either. Okay, yes. You also, you are a scientist. You studied biology, and also you've shared that you are a theist. And I don't know if you would like to, for example, describe what you mean by being a theist, or what is your definition of faith, for example.
Okay, so this is going to be a long answer. You ask me all those things, right? So just cards on the table. I'm a Christian. My background, I grew up in Greece, and I grew up in a Presbyterian church there. That's one of the churches of out of the Reformation. So my background is really in kind of Reformed theology, Calvin, Luther, all that kind of stuff. When I was 16, I became a Christian, as they say. I made the decision, or as you call it, and I haven't had any reason to go back ever since. What I would mean as a theist is, I think the simple definition is, you believe that God exists ontologically. He's not a symbolic thing. You don't believe that he's kind of something made up. But you actually believe that he exists, which is very difficult to be a Christian if you don't believe that God exists. Christian atheism does exist. I know it's a thing, but it's a very small thing, and in my opinion, a little bit difficult to maintain if you want to take the Bible seriously. So yeah, that's it. As for what faith is, that's something that I'm really exploring these days in this time of my life. A lot of my Christian faith, like most Christians, has been handed down by sort of tradition and by preaching and teaching, which is good. It gives you this foundation. But partly the problem is that you have to start asking yourself sometimes. You have to get to a point where you're asking yourself questions like, what does it mean to actually believe something? What does it mean to say that if you say that you believe something, how should that reflect on your life? Should it reflect on your life, and how? So it's really a time in my life where I'm really asking that question. Oh, somebody just joined us. So faith is a little bit more complicated to describe than just giving a straight up testimony. But I think it's interesting because I think it's something that all of us exercise to some extent. I mean, it doesn't matter what you believe in, or it doesn't matter what worldview you hold. You will always exercise you will always take for granted or as axioms certain things without actually having any underlying foundation necessarily. And this is going all the way back to the Enlightenment. I think, therefore I am, and Descartes and all that kind of stuff, right? I mean, how do we know what we know, and why do we believe what we believe? So faith is a little bit more difficult to define for me. The Bible defines that, it's the assurance of things not seen. I don't think that's a philosophical definition. I think it's more of a description of it. But maybe that's also a good place to kind of start, because in the end, that's what we all mean when we say I believe something. It means that, I have to exercise some kind of extension of my will in order to agree or to accord myself with something for which I don't have immediate empirical evidence. Yeah, I think that's a fairly stretchy definition for it. So that's what I'd look at as faith. But I have come to acknowledge that it's a far more complicated thing than both theists and atheists often give credit to or acknowledge. So is that okay as an answer? I hope that answer. I don't want to leave anybody going, oh, he dodged the question or something. I don't want anybody thinking that. But tend to think as I talk, so I might be improvising a little bit. I'm going to clean my glasses for a moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No worries. Yeah. Also, there is a question related to that one, which is, based on, well, you have not defined God, but do you think that the notion that you have of God is incompatible with other faiths? Like, for example, I don't know, maybe with Islam, or is it compatible, like the notion that you have of God is compatible with multiple faiths?
Well, there's obviously compatibility to some extent, right? I mean, if we're talking theologically, like we're talking about the attributes of God, for example, well, one of them is the fact that he exists, right? So that's it, right? If you're an atheist, you don't believe he exists, so your theology is pretty short, but it's still a theology, right? It's a view of God. So if you believe that God exists, then there's a compatibility there. There's a massive overlap with pretty much every other theistic religion out there, right? Then you start the question, so it's kind of like a pyramid, right? You start with a big sort of foundation at the bottom, and then you can start climbing, and things kind of fall off as you get narrower and narrower. Well, if he exists, then, what's he like? Well, he's sovereign. He can do whatever he wants, right? Nobody's twisting his arm, nobody's blocking him. Okay, so there's agreement there with Islam, there's agreement there with obviously Judaism. Obviously, there's a lot of agreement about the nature of God between Christianity and Judaism. Okay, so if he's sovereign, does he care about people? Does he care about the world? Well, the deists, for example, will say, well, no. He kind of wound up the world and said, okay, bye, figure it out yourselves. And certainly the world feels like that very much, very often. But, Christians and Islam and I'm trying to think about Judaism and some other theistic religions will say, well, yes, he does. I mean, if he doesn't care about the world and he has nothing to do with it, then that's pretty much a pointless discussion, right? Whether he exists or not. Is kind of utilitarianly, it's kind of a pointless discussion. Then you keep moving. Well, what's he like? Is he a loving God? Does he love people, or does he just like hate their guts and wants to basically destroy them all? Well, things get complicated there, right? Is God loving? Is he not? Can he stop evil or can he not stop evil? Things get even more complicated there. The sort of roots separate. What is his nature? Right? Is he one or is he three? Huge difference there between Islam and Christianity. Christianity believes that God is three persons but one nature, right? So the Trinity. Islam believes that God is one. Judaism also holds that God is one, right? The Shema in Israel says that hear, O Israel, the Lord God your God is one. So suddenly now we have differences because if I'm sitting talking to a Muslim, his or her view of God is that Allah is one and there's no other equals to him or whatever. In Christianity, we have the concept of the Trinity, which is inescapable in my opinion if you read the Bible. You can't help it because the Bible speaks of three different entities when it comes to God. And that's been a 2,000-year discussion trying to pinpoint what exactly we mean by the Trinity, but we certainly don't mean that God is just one and he kind of changes forms, or that God is just one and Jesus, for example, is not, and the Holy Spirit is just some idea. There have been attempts to do that too, but in mainstream sort of Christianity, the idea is that God has one nature, is inseparable, but he consists. I don't even know what the right verb is here. He exists in three persons: the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So certainly now you're not compatible anymore with other religions. That immediately creates problems. The personhood of God is the God of the Bible, of the New Testament and the Old Testament. I'm a Christian, so for me, there's no difference in the idea of God between the two. But the God of the Bible has personhood. He's a personal God. He has a personality, right? He wants things, he does things, he says things. For Muslims, Allah is not, I wouldn't say that he doesn't have personhood, but he's a little bit more, let's say, distant and uninvolved. He kind of sends his sort of rules, and that's kind of it. And that's something a Muslim told me, because I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on Islam. So that's a big difference too. And then that also starts having issues with, well, when I pray to him, does he listen? Should I pray to him? And so forth. And that's where all the differences start arising. So the question of whether or not, my faith or my understanding of God is compatible with other religions, well, at some point it depends on how far do we want to hold hands. Clear, if it was compatible across the entire spectrum of attributes of God, then you wouldn't have different religions. You just have one, right? You just basically have the theists and the non-theists, and that's it. But obviously things can peel off. And even within Christianity itself, as we start looking into God, for example, what does God want from us, right? I come out of the Reformation sort of background, so I'm very big on what we call justification by faith alone. The idea that what God wants from us is to believe in Jesus Christ, and as we trust in him, that's what we mean by believe. When we trust in him, our sins are forgiven, then his sort of righteousness becomes ours. He takes on our sins, and then we are saved simply by faith. But my Catholic friends would disagree, and they'd say, no, you also have to have, that's part of it, but you also have to sort of earn in a way your salvation by performing certain sacraments and certain works and things like that. My Greek Orthodox friends, I'm Greek, so my Greek Orthodox friends have zero categories of justification of faith alone and salvation and believe in Jesus kind of stuff, because for them the emphasis in Eastern Orthodox theology, especially Greek Orthodox theology, has been to have this notion of theosis, this idea that as you engage with the church and the mysteries of the church, you become basically more and more, you inhabit more and more the personhood, the character of God as displayed in Jesus Christ, which is something that my tribe of Christians would call sanctification, something that happens after you've come to Christ. So even within mainstream Christianity, you have this kind of breakaway in views when you start asking, well, what does God want? What happened on the cross when Jesus died? How do you go to heaven? That's a huge question. Do you go to heaven? Is there a hell? Stuff like that. Like, who goes to hell? Who goes to heaven? You start having these differences. So the discussion of who God is and what he wants will, I think, inevitably lead to differences, right? I'm talking, you said your community consists predominantly of atheists, so I imagine question number one, does God exist? No, well, we're done, right? The hands kind of separate, and that's it. And the discussion becomes then philosophical. But even within the theistic stream, you'll have a lot of these different views. And there's various reasons, and very complex and not dismissible reasons for why these differences exist and will continue to exist. So I hope that answers your question a bit.
Yep. Yeah.
Wow, we really warmed up, right?
Yes. So in this particular question, or in your answer, I can see that you are, very reflective on comparing the different faiths, and there are some compatibilities and some incompatibilities. This is more or less what we are trying to do here in the server. Understand, what this person understands by faith, and how these belongs to a particular belief system, and what differentiates each doctrine, or what is differentiating each doctrine, and just being reflective on what everyone believes. It's basically the one of the goals here. Um, yeah, so you mentioned, yeah, in the server we are more atheists than theists, but there are also agnostics, and one person, also the same user, IC, asks, what do you think of agnostics that, for example, do not affirm nor deny the existence of God, but, for example, can act as if God exists?
Somebody's listening to Jordan Peterson, right? That was a direct quote, right? All right. Well, like I said, faith is fairly complicated, okay, and I'm trying to figure things out also about how that works. So as far as I know, agnosticism, my experience is probably more widespread than clear-cut atheism. So, for example, when Richard Dawkins wrote his book, The God Delusion, he gave 6 categories of belief, right? This absolute conviction that God exists, all the way down to the absolute conviction that God does not exist, and then another 4 things in the middle. And most of them would be what we'd call today agnosticism, right? So on one hand, I think you have this view, this kind of pieces of agnosticism of people who will say, I don't know. And I think that's the most widespread. If you push the average person, in the West at least, as to what do you really believe happens, like if you die right now, what do you believe is out there? I think you'll get more people saying, I just don't know, okay, or if they answered honestly, rather than absolutely convinced there's nothing, right? Which is also, you'll get people. I think that's just anecdotal evidence. I don't know, maybe the Pew people should do a Gallup in that. So there's a species of agnosticism that will say, I don't know, and I just, I am not at a point where I can say anything with any particular certainty. And that's fair enough. There's also another species, maybe a little bit smaller, which I think is the agnosticism that says you can't know. It is impossible to know anything beyond empirical knowledge, philosophical materialism. You can't know anything past that. And that's a different kind of species. And I think it's good to distinguish the two, because we're talking about 2 very different types of people here and 2 very different types of thinking, right? One is this, look, I'm looking at the world, I'm looking at everything people have said about, what lies in the great beyond or whatever, or nothing. And I just, it's very hard to come down on something and say, yes, I know this with absolute certainty. Fair enough, right? And that's, I think, the most widespread type of agnosticism. And you know what? I completely understand that, right? Christianity has been around, for example, for 2,000 years. And if you just do a cursory study of church history and Christian theology and Christian history just like that, it will give you a headache. I mean, the differences in views, in the differences in groups, movements, emphases, all these things. And that's just Christianity, right? So you look at that, let's say in Europe and in the West, where Christianity had a much bigger impact on morals and ethics and all that kind of stuff. And you look at that and you just, your head hurts. You just kind of sit there going, man, who can possibly know for sure, right? So that to me is a very honest and honestly, I completely understand and identify with that. The more I study, the more I understand people who say, I just don't know. Right. The idea, the other type of agnosticism of I can't know, that has a certain certainty inherent into it. Right. That's the idea that it is impossible to know that. Well, how do you know? I mean, you guys are street epistemology, right? How do you know that you can't know? Right. How did you come to that conclusion? So it's important to separate those two, because I've often had discussions even before I was a Christian with people, and you often talk past each other. If you don't pinpoint where somebody is, it's very difficult to have a meaningful discussion. And I've often made the mistake of just hearing somebody says I'm an agnostic, and my question should have been, what kind of agnostic, rather than just jump on and try to shove evidences for God or whatever, right? I mean, I've personally done a lot of talking past each other in my life. So I think it's a very understandable approach to the vast amount of knowledge that we have concerning and information that we have, especially across the world, of thinking that's been done in the case of God. And I think that I really respect people who honestly and meaningfully engage with something and treat it with the seriousness it deserves. I have come across both Christians and atheists who are very dismissive of this whole massive corpus of knowledge, and and both Christians and atheists. I'm not trying to to defend anybody here, and I just don't understand that. I don't understand how somebody can just give a cursory glance at this and make up their mind. I mean, I think there's more psychology involved there than knowledge. So yeah, those are my thoughts about agnosticism. I think it's important to distinguish between those two. There might be more. I'm not an agnostic myself, but those are the two that I've kind of identified in conversations that I've had over my life with people.
Yeah. So, what, for example, with an agnostic that behaves as if God existed, do you think that this person is lacking something because it's not behaving because of faith, or do you think that like these are at the end is equal? That these are the same as a Christian, or what do you think? Are they different at the end? Do you think that the same?
So this is why I mentioned Peterson, because he raises that question. And every time somebody asks him, "Do you believe in God?" At least he used to give that answer that, "Well, I act as if God exists." And there's been a lot of internet being spent on trying to figure out what he means by that. I think his recent discussion with John Vervaeke, which is a mind-twisting thing, but anyway, if you can get through that, he actually addresses that a little bit, and I think he's coming to terms with it a little bit more. But it really kind of raised that question. If somebody acts like a Christian, if they act as if God exists, well, is that the same as being a Christian? Right? So I'm going to tread very carefully here, right? Because I don't want to be accused of being, narrow-minded or whatever, but I'm going to be very, very careful here. So I would say that, for me, Christianity comes out of the Bible, right? I mean, that's where you start. It's epistemology. So why do I believe in God? Why? Because of the Bible. Why do you believe the Bible? Well, that's a whole other discussion. Let's not get into that, right? Mostly because I read it and it blows my mind. But, you look at the Bible and you find that, well, the model that you see there with people is usually people believe something and then they actually fail to act according to that. Like most people in the Bible, I mean, one of the biggest themes in the Bible is sin. Well, what is sin? Sin is the concept that you fail to reach your target. You're aiming for a target and you actually fail to hit it, right? It's an archery term in ancient Greek, for example. So that's what sin is. You aiming for something and you miss it. And then that translates as sort of disobedience to something God said and everything. But the vast majority of people, with the exception of Jesus Christ, everybody else in the Bible believes in God, believes what God has said is true, and then we've got a story showing how they pretty much failed to do it, or they didn't do it properly. I mean, there's failure across the board with every single hero in Scripture, in the Bible. I mean, start with, Adam and Eve, right? You got the story there, then you get Noah who gets drunk, right, and cavorts around naked or whatever. You get Abraham, and he basically endangers his wife twice to get out of trouble. Can't wait for God's promise and all that. I mean, there's a whole litany of failure after failure after failure. So the question that arises in your head when you read the Bible is, well, so what is faith? Is it I believe something, I profess it, I say it, and then I fail to live it? Right? Should we hold faith up to the standard of perfect behavior? Right? And this is important to this question because, well, now you've reversed it. So here's a person who says, I'm not sure if God exists. I guess if you put a gun to my head, I might say there might be something there, but I don't know. But I will live as if God exists. Well, that's very peculiar in terms of the Bible, because in the Bible you have not only the reverse of that, but the model is, well, you act because you actually believe in something. Your belief is supposed to lead to an action. So once you sever that, or at least you say that you've severed that, well, it becomes very difficult to understand, first of all, why you would live as if God exists, if you don't believe that he exists. And secondly, well, also, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by living as if God exists? And secondly, well, actually, there's no secondly. No, sorry, why? And then how? Actually, that's also the question, how? Because in the Bible, you have people who believe in God, and then they mess up really badly. So how are you expected to hold up yourself to certain perfection? That kind of perfect standard. So this comes back to this concept of faith. Faith is meant to be something in Scripture, in the Bible. Faith is supposed to be something that kind of transforms your life, right? So, for example, the book of James in the New Testament, right, and towards the end, he talks about how faith without works is dead. He says, well, what good is it to say that you believe? He says even the devils, right, the demons believe and they freak out. They're scared, right? So what he says is, people come up to me and essentially they say, well, I have faith. And he's like, well, show me your faith from your works. So the idea that James has, and this is an idea in the New Testament, is that, well, if you believe, your life should at least majorly reflect that. So there's that connection between belief and action in Scripture, right, in the Bible. So it's a very strange model to push back on the Bible and say, well, I'm not going to bother with the content of belief, the dogma, the doctrine, the God and all that kind of stuff. I won't, but I'm going to act as if God exists. Well, it's difficult because, well, if you don't believe anything about God, then how do you form the standards by which you will act as if God exists? For example, we all think of God as love, right? So, okay, let's go and feed the poor people and grab a ladle and do the soup kitchens and give money to charity and all that, and that's a wonderful thing, and certainly it's in accordance with Christian ethics, of course. But what happens when you have more complicated situations, like, for example, you have to dispense justice, right? If you don't have any standards of who God is and what He likes and what He doesn't, how are you going to decide where your love or your goodness kind of stops and where it becomes wrong? How do you decide whether or not somebody should live or die because they committed a crime? How do you do those things? So it's something that kind of puzzles me, and I think it puzzles Peterson too, because I think in that discussion with Vervaeke, he kind of sounds as if he's trying to work that a little bit more, because it's an easy thing to say, but I don't think that it's an easy thing to live consistently. And I think that two people who said, I don't believe in God, I'm not sure about that, but I'm going to act as if God exists, would probably end up expressing that life or living out that life very differently to each other. So if you're acting as if God exists, you're already making sort of an assumption that there is a God, that there's a standard on which I will base my behavior. Does that make sense? You might look. You've got the math, so I can't read your face. I don't know if you're confused. I don't know if you're happy. I don't know if you. This is all making sense. So to me, it's a very, very difficult way of life. And my first question is, well, why would you? Why would you, if you've decided that you believe that God exists, why would you want to live like that? But there's another leg to that. Sorry, I should have mentioned at the beginning. There's two legs in my thinking in this. But so the second leg is, though, that, and this is something that has really hit me these days, is that, because after the Enlightenment, and we live now in the coattails of the Enlightenment, we in the West especially tend to think of knowledge mostly as propositional knowledge, right? So there's different types of knowledge. I'm sure your community listens to John Vervaeke, so they're probably better rehearsed in that than I am. So you got all these different types of knowledge, and we seem to have landed very heavily on the idea of propositional knowledge. And propositional knowledge is basically what we call book knowledge, right? I mean, I was asking about a friend who's a football player, and I was asking him yesterday, I said, look, what if you give me a book that describes exactly what it's like to feel and to act and to play on the field during the World Cup, I read that book and I assimilate it in my head, did I then stand up to you and say, I know football as well as you do? And he said, well, no. So obviously that doesn't work, right? The book, the information doesn't give me the knowledge that can make me say I'm a football player now. No, there's something else, and that's what we call participatory knowledge, right? You need to engage with it, you need to participate. Now, so on one hand, the first leg of my thinking was that it's very difficult to live as if God exists if you haven't got some form of clarity as to what God is. I just find it very difficult to go beyond being nice to people and being kind and giving to the poor. I don't see how you could extend beyond that if you don't have some clarity as to what God is or who God is. The second leg is that I do understand, though, that for many people today, dogma and doctrine is very difficult to absorb, right? It's very difficult to sort of put in their heads. And the reason is that Christianity itself has become very propositional knowing based. It's become very heavily doctrinal, very heavily on our systematic theologies and our sort of analysis of the text and all that kind of stuff. And we seem, and especially from my side, the Reformed camp of things, we are very big on knowledge, right? You know, you got a problem, here's a book to read. You know, you got another problem, here's 16 articles to read, right? You know, we're always reading, we value that very much. And the problem is that it seems to me more and more that faith is not propositional knowing based. It's based on a more holistic or comprehensive knowing. So for some people, I can understand that what they want to do is, instead of waiting until they actually get all the knowledge in their head and believe things, and they'll just go to a church and they'll just start participating. They'll just go and listen to sermons and they'll give to the poor, and they want to engage with this God sort of life before they actually start agreeing with all the doctrine. So there's a story, right? Because I know I'm getting a bit complicated here, but there's a story, and I can't remember who it was, one of the saints or whatever, right? I think in the East, and he had a disciple, and his disciple comes over and he says, "Oh, you know, I find it difficult. I don't believe this. I don't believe that. I find it difficult. The virgin birth, I can't understand." And the guy said, "Well, go give alms. Go and give to the poor." Why? So the guy goes, he gives to the poor, and he comes back. You feel like, well, you know, I don't believe this. Go give more alms, you know, go and give more to the poor. So the guy goes, and they keep doing that, and suddenly he finds that when his doubts don't really matter all that much, because now he's participating in that life of Christ, that Christ-centered sort of giving to others. Because so his mentor is basically saying, look, why don't you start engaging first? Why don't you start participating first and leave the propositional knowing for later? So there's also that. When I hear people say, I want to live as if God exists, that's again another question as to, well, what do you mean by that? Is it because you know you're kind of there, you can't walk the doctrine, you can't, the virgin birth, existence of God, that, you know, the hypostatic union of Christ, all those things, the Trinity, it's so complicated and you can't get in your head, but you just want, you feel drawn to partake and to participate? Or is it because some other reasons that I don't understand? So those are the two sort of tensions, the two sort of legs, I guess, that I see in that particular that particular response when they talk about that. I'm sure that people who say that would have a lot better answers to give, but well, I'm the one talking here, so you know they asked me what I think, so yeah. That's it. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thanks for telling me that Jordan Peterson has recently talked about this again, because I wanted more information about what he meant by that when he said it, when in being asked whether he believed in God or not. Thanks for your answer. I would like to ask you first, because you told me that you had more or less an hour. I have all the time in the world, but I don't know if you have any time constraints or...
Not hugely. I probably have another good 45 minutes if you want.
Perfect. Yeah. Because for example, I have other interesting questions that, but first, I would like to come back to this answer that you gave. You mentioned that if a person could behave as if God existed, but they lack, or how could they do that if they lack, for example, the clarity of what it means to behave as if God existed? Like, do you think that in a hypothetical situation, do you think that by having, for example, those teachings, the theology, whether that would you think that, okay, this is closer to what a Christian is, or behaving as a Christian is? Or do you think that no, there must be faith there? Well,
I don't think knowledge does anything in of itself, right? I mean, we all know things that zero to our lives, right? You know that Italy won the Euro thing. How did that change your life? That was an awesome game, but how did that change your life? Unless, you know, you made money out of it or something, right? So knowledge in of itself doesn't really do anything, and that's something that I think Christians really need to start engaging with. That just knowing things is not going to transform you. I think the goal is to have knowledge that encourages your faith, and then that faith translating into life, into a certain life. Now, there's one thing I need to point out here, because I know that some people might disagree, but coming from a reformed kind of camp, I need to point this out, that the idea in the Bible, as far as the reformed people are concerned, is that if you're a Christian, you are not, you still won't live a perfect life. You don't go to heaven because you lived a nice, good, moral life. You go to heaven because you trusted in Christ, who lived a perfect moral life, and then his righteousness becomes yours. Right? We call this the great exchange, alien righteousness, the imputation of righteousness. There's got many different names in Reformed theology. Right? That's a very big concept, because the traditional idea is that, well, who goes to heaven? Good people. And who goes to hell? Bad people. Well, who's good? Who's bad? Right? What's the cutoff? Right? And if you believe in that, and the story in the Bible is that actually nobody is going to get into heaven by their own works. Even in the Old Testament, you'll have a lot of information there, a lot of verses, and a lot of text that will tell you that the idea is nobody is going to make it with God, because we're fallen, we've sinned, we've lost that. And the reason that Jesus comes and dies on the cross is because he pays for the sins of the world, so that those who trust in him instead of themselves or instead of their works, they will be able, they are then declared righteous. So basically, the idea of a good Christian is a bit of a weird thing, because I know what people mean. A good Christian is, you don't swear, you don't smoke, you don't hold hands with your girlfriend or whatever, I don't know, right? All that stuff. But the reality is that a good Christian is really somebody who trusts in God more than they trust in themselves. That might not necessarily mean that should manifest in their character and their behavior, but might not necessarily mean that it doesn't place on them this burden of absolute perfection. So you didn't become a Christian so that then you still have to be perfect in order to earn your place with God. You became a Christian because you know that you can't, and you repent of your sins and you trust in Christ, and then because of that, because of his perfect life and because of his perfect righteousness, his becomes yours, and then you are in heaven because of that. Now, my Orthodox friends and Catholic friends would disagree with that, and that's a huge discussion, but I think it bears meaning here, because I don't want to give the impression that, being a Christian means that you live this kind of perfect moral life and everything. Being a Christian, first and foremost, means trusting in Christ. I mean, you look at his disciples in the Gospels, and they all mess up all the time. I mean, Peter denied him like 3 times. After Jesus told him, he denies him, right? They're killing him on the cross, and he denies him. He still repents, and he's still back there, and he's still restored, and he's still of use. Paul is persecuting the church and then goes blind. I mean, there's all these stories that are there to show that your morality, your good works are not there to help you earn your place with God. Rather it's Christ, it's faith in Christ that will actually qualify you. That's a good word. To actually be to enter heaven, or to be with God. So I don't want to give the impression here that when we talk about living a life that as if God exists, to me, my first question would be, well, that would mean, as a Christian, for me, that means the first thing that you should be doing is wondering who Jesus is and how that relates to you, because that to me is the priority. If you're trying to live a perfectly moral life as if God exists, then you might find yourself sorely disappointed, like all those people in the Bible. So sorry, I kind of deviated there a little bit, but I just wanted to catch that, because I don't want to give the impression that being a Christian means, hey, you're perfect and you're morally perfect and upstanding, and the idea is exactly the opposite. The idea is that you stand before God and you go, oh my goodness, I'm lost, and then you cry out for this Savior, which is Jesus Christ. So that's it. And I know there's people who would disagree with that in the Christian camp, but that's my reading of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, no, thanks.
Did that answer? I think I kind of derailed there a little bit, but
So for me, it's clear that in your opinion, for somebody to have the label as a Christian must have faith or trust in God, not necessarily only behaving like the knowledge alone. It's not enough for you to. That's my understanding. So those were questions to understand what you mean with your faith, with those definitions. But there are also other type of questions, like, well, with your profile being a biologist, one question from a user called Promethean is, how do you reconcile, for example, believing in evolution and the Bible?
Currently pretty well. It used to be a huge problem for me, a massive problem, mostly because I understood neither. I didn't understand either the Bible or evolution. I think I've grown in that, and having shed some of the, let's find nice ways to say this. Let's say that it's having shed some of my my former obstacles. I really don't have that much of a problem. I know many of my fellow Christians would tear their hair hearing me say that, but no, that has never been. It's no longer an issue for me. So I don't. When I read Genesis, let's get to the meat of it, because I think this is what they're asking. You know, when you read Genesis 1 and 2, how do you square that with like millions of years of evolution and everything? I don't think I'm one of those Christians who don't think that Genesis 1 and 2 were written to give us what we call today a modern scientific explanation of origins of life. I don't believe that. I believe there's truth in there. It's just that it's not truth the way we would mean it today. And I think it's more of a case of we need to sit down and think about what we mean by truth and why we accept truth only one way, rather than, oh, well, this is just a silly poem that talks about, you know, God sort of zapping people into existence, right? So again, it's one of those things that after, I think I've been studying the debate for a good 20 years now, and it's changed a lot because obviously new thinking comes in. I think that it's just one of those cases where people have been talking past each other for a long time. To open the book of Genesis that was written, I think it's 4,000 years ago, to a different audience, to different people, to talk to people who are under, you know, the influence of different what do you call it, creation myths, like the Babylonian ones, like the Mesopotamian ones, the Egyptian. And to read that as if it's supposed to be some kind of, as if it's some kind of account of the beginning of the world written in 2021, just beyond absurd. And I think Christians often do a disservice to the Bible and the wisdom inherent in the Bible by reading Genesis, by burdening the text of Genesis with modern concerns and modern expectations. I think that's just wrong. There's a lot of people out there who can talk about this a lot more, let's say, eloquently and more knowledgeably than I do. One of the recent books that really kind of set the course for a new conversation was by Joshua Swamidass, The Genealogical Adam and Eve. There's a lot of other. There's another one that was interesting, was Genesis Unbound by John Sailhamer, can't remember. But I mean, there's a lot of scholars, biblical scholars, who have approached the text of Genesis and have shown that, you know, trying to force it to debate Darwin is just, it's like, you know, trying, I don't know how to put it. It's like trying to push oil and water together. It's just, you know, they have different purposes, different functions, different audiences, and a different. This is a case of perspectival knowledge, for example, right? It's a different perspective on the world. What Genesis is trying to teach and tell us is, in my opinion, things that science is unconcerned with, modern science is unconcerned with. So yeah, it used to be a lot harder for me to do that, and I spend a lot of time with this cognitive dissonance in my head. And I imagine there's a lot of Christians who are scientists out there who still have that. And I've finally come to a point where, you know, it's okay. For me, I think that the theory of evolution obviously has evolved itself a lot, and it's undergoing quite a few changes. There's still challenges in it. There's enough to challenge Darwin without having to go into the Bible or any other kind of religious text or anything like that. There's enough there. But I think it's I think the evidence, for me at least, the evidence leaves really no doubt that evolution as we understand it happened in the world, and especially human evolution, which is something that a lot of my own research has taken into account. Right. I know I will be burned at the stake by many of my friends who will probably hear this and will tear their clothes and rend their clothes. But I think it's time to have a serious and a bit grown-up conversation about this, because this whole idea of I don't on one camp, well, the Bible is stupid because these goat herders from the Bronze Age wrote what they thought about this magic being who brought other things into existence like that. Well, that's nonsense, and I don't believe the Bible because it doesn't speak to my scientific concerns, is almost as dismissive and unhelpful as the other side going, well, there's no continuous species in the fossil record, or what is Ray Comfort's banana thing, where you peel the banana and you think, well, there you go, it's designed to be opened up like that. I mean, there's been a lot of junk in this conversation. And I think it's time that we actually have a proper grown-up conversation about this. And I'm glad that there are very good people out there doing that. And, I can send a reading list, but I think anybody can Google, especially the new writers now, and they will find some remarkable, both biblical analysis and scientific analysis. And I think that's very helpful, because most of my Christian life has been this noise of basically two camps talking past each other. So yeah, doesn't bother me that much anymore. I'm free.
Yeah. Another question which relates to this one and also to your answer, like it reminds me, for example, my mom, she's a Christian, and she thinks that what's in the Bible, it's not incompatible with what evolution is. So for example, she says that, I don't know much Bible verses, but she says that for God 1 day is like billion years, or billion years is like 1 day, or something like that. And she thinks that, for example, those specific teachings or whatever that she finds somehow say or suggest that evolution and the Bible are compatible. So one question that somebody asks, Elferto, ATR, is if there is a way in which you could have a biblical origin of life that includes evolution. Do you consider that as an option, or? Yes,
I do. I mean, it would be nice to just say that, that young earth creationism is the answer. Honestly, it would just make life a lot easier. But, the reason people don't jump on 6-day young earth creationism is because it's not because they're deceived by the devil, or because, they want to sort of undermine the Bible or whatever. It's because they're faced, and often they're like me, like they're people who have had first-hand exposure to the evidence that doesn't fit that model, right? So that's one. Secondly, and I'm happy to be corrected by historical theologians here, historical theologians here. But it seems to me that nobody in the idea of this God made the world in 6 days kind of thing, and the days being taken as literal 24 hours. It seems to me that it's a new import into Christianity, as opposed to, for 2,000 years, I don't think that was an issue that much. Now, that might not be fair, because obviously this didn't really become an issue until Darwin came in and challenged, that what seemed to have emerged as the traditional view of God making the world, and that was a bit of a different debate than what we're having today. But this idea that the days were like 24-hour days seems to be more of an import of kind of the late 19th century pre and then post fundamentalist kind of movements in America. This idea that we have to go back to biblical literalism and all that. It's again, in my opinion, it's a bit of a child of modernity. This idea that you have to take the Bible literally. Nobody for 2,000 years ever suggested that you have to take the entirety of the Bible literally. But suddenly, you just have to. Otherwise, you're not a good Christian. So there's many ways to reconcile. I mean, the one thing that's interesting about Genesis, right? Just so I don't sound like I'm just bashing the Bible here, right? But one of the things that I find very interesting is that, yeah, okay, you can dismiss it as, oh, well, it's not scientific, but why are the steps in creation? You know, I mean, why does God suddenly doesn't come and just go, there you go, here's the world, done? And the steps in creation seem to be from lesser complexity to higher complexity, right? He doesn't make the animals first, and then, oh, the animals need to eat something, here's the grass for it. He first makes plants, then animals. So there's this notion of going from lower complexity to higher complexity, right? And then you end up with human beings, at least the human beings in the garden, which are made by the image of in the image of God, right? So why is it like that? Wouldn't it just make an easier story that, you know, just God just kind of appears and says, oh, you know, I'm just going to make the world and here we go, done. You know, first 2 verses done. Why is there a whole chapter in Genesis describing it step by step by step, right? That's a good question. I mean, that, you know, to me, these are little hints that, like your mother said, wisely, I think, is that, you know, there's, you know, truth is truth. And I think that should be the motto of your community, I guess, like truth is truth, it's out there, right? And I think anything that purports to be in accordance to truth will end up overlapping with other attempts to understand truth, right? So there are things in Genesis itself that make it very difficult to just dismiss it as some kind of, you know, these Bronze Age people just writing, you know, fantasy stories. Because, yeah, you know, it'll be a lot easier to just say, no, to look at around you and say, well, there's all these different mythologies of creation myths around me. So, no, we're just going to make up our new one, and, well, our God, he just made everything in one go. No, 6 days, slowly, step by step, whatever the day was, whatever those periods, there's a step progression in making the world, and then culminating in the creation of people, which differs to some of the other accounts of the time of the Near East, of the ancient Near East. So, you know, just before we just go to the whole, oh, well, I believe in science and I reject the Bible or whatever, you know, it's kind of interesting to think, well, here's these goat herders, right? These people who, you know, lived in the desert or whatever, and yet they're writing this book. And, well, why is it in steps? Wouldn't God look a lot better if he just made everything in one go like that? You know, snap his fingers, and it's in steps. Why is it in steps? And then, lo and behold, we've got this theory that tells us that life started in, well, steps, gradually, progressively. It didn't just all appear, right? So even the trajectory of creation in Genesis seems to me to have some kind of ancient proto-correspondence with what we call today the theory of evolution, right? My point in all this is that the issue is not settled. It might not be ever, because we're talking about 2 different perspectives in knowing. And I think that, you know, there's a lot more discussion to be done. And I think I encourage the discussion. I don't think that it's settled, and I don't really listen much to people who talk as if the whole thing is just, yeah, it's done. You know, got it all figured out. There's a lot of wisdom. This is why I love the Bible, you see, because there's layers upon layers of wisdom hidden in there. And just to answer the question from early on, you know, what faith is, at least in the Bible was written not to just give us this propositional knowing, you know, otherwise it would just be a bunch of statements. You know, God is this, God is not this, God is this, God is this, God wants this, end of story. It does have some of that, because you need knowledge to do things. But mostly the effort of the Bible is to make us what we call wise unto God, to give us this kind of wisdom into how will we live now that, you know, knowing that God is there and what he wants. How should we live to become wise unto God? And that development of wisdom, as Vervaeke very correctly says, John Vervaeke says very correctly, that development of wisdom is something that we've lost entirely from our society today, especially in the West. We've lost that pursuit of wisdom. And by reducing all of knowledge to propositional knowledge, we end up having these useless debates like creation, evolution, and, you know, basically talking past each other on things. Because in the end, faith, you know, I'm a Christian. I don't wake up in the morning and rehearse Anselm's ontological argument for the existence of God just so I can get on with my day. I don't do that, right? I just get up in the morning, grab my Bible, get some coffee, and read it and pray. I don't do this whole exercise to remind myself to find these propositional arguments as to why God exists. I don't do that. No Christian I know does that, and if they did, they would need counseling, right? Similarly, the reason why people would reject the existence of God and not believe in God is probably the same, runs along the same lines. They don't wake up in the morning and rehearse their arguments against the existence of God. It's something innate inside them that needs to be wrestled with, right? We are very complex beings, and I think faith is a lot more complex than we give it credit to. And I think the Bible also describes faith as that in some ways, or at least hints that faith is a lot more complicated. This trust. I think that, we do ourselves and we do religion and everything a disservice when we talk as if the only way of knowing something is this dogmatic, doctrinal, clarity, systematic, propositional kind of formal logic, which we inherited from the German school of the Enlightenment, and for some reason came like that. It's more comprehensive, it's more deep, which is why a person could read the Bible, might not agree with everything in there, but still feel this pull, this gravity to go and explore it or live like it, or live as if God exists, as people say. It's not everything, but it's totally understandable. So I'm going to keep coming back to that because that's my big thing these days. That's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
So there you go, massive, huge 15-minute answer or whatever.
Thanks. Thanks. There's another question, which, based on what you mentioned of evolution and how you reconcile it with your faith. It's phrased like this, the question, whether in your opinion there are beliefs that come with the to believe in God package that are in conflict with current scientific practices or knowledge. But so I guess they meant with this question, for example, evolution, that might be in conflict. If you believe in God, you have this package of, okay, but I guess you explained already how you reconcile this. But I was also thinking about doubt. For example, there are some theists that having doubts, lacking certainty might be something that is undesirable. How do you feel in this respect? Do you feel comfortable doubting, or this is something that you have? You don't.
It's funny. Somebody asked me yesterday. This happened yesterday. How does doubt feel? This was this person's question. That's amazing. So that's twice, and I went on in this long tirade and rant about things. Look, I'm going to speak a bit personally also here, right? I personally have spent most of my Christian life trying and aiming for certainty, absolute certainty, and that led me, without realizing it, because I was young and I hadn't thought about things, but it led me to people who taught, preachers and people who taught in the Christian world, with that air of confidence and certainty. I'm no longer doing that. I am undergoing a pretty long period of reevaluation, review, thinking a bit more deeply about things, and I'm embarrassed that often I've found myself in my life sort of defending things that oppositions or opinions that I am no longer particularly sure about, or that I just simply got from some authority figure rather than thought and came up with it myself. I think what's important is that you need to be able to balance the information you're getting, right? The work that's been done by people who think through things. Like I said before, Christianity has been around for 2,000 years, and if you're a Christian, you believe even longer than that because the Old Testament is there. You can't just dismiss all that and say, I'm going to reinvent the wheel, right? Usually, if you try to do that, what happens usually is you end up reinventing some heresy that has been dealt with, 1,000 years ago, or not heresy, let's say some position that has been argued about years and years ago. Often people who have some new idea about Christianity and write books are usually just rehashing older views that didn't make the cut. So it's important not to just look at it and go, oh, well, that's all unimportant, I'm just going to do my own thing. At the same time, it is important to search for yourself. it's important to go on this journey on yourself and start looking and searching and asking. And inevitably, that carries with it inherently the risk of doubt. It's going to carry with it the risk of, I'm not sure, I don't really understand, I don't really get this. Thankfully, because it's been 2,000 years, a lot of those doubts, especially knowledge doubts, have been, not decisively, but have been certainly engaged with and argued with by Christians, right? There's like a million books on apologetics out there, what we call Christian apologetics, Christian philosophers, you know, things like that. I mean, even the issue of Christian epistemology, right? I mean, you read Alvin Plantinga, for example, and you know that's a huge headway into developing a model for Christian epistemology, right? I mean, that's massive. And his work, and William Lane Craig, I guess, a little bit too on his side. But you know, you're just a human being, right? And you're faced with this massive corpus of knowledge, and I think it's inevitable, even among Christians, it's inevitable that you will end up with things that really don't make sense to you. You might say they make sense, or you might not touch them because you might be in a church or a group or a social group, that, or you might just not want to mention it, but there are things that you won't understand. And you know, when it gets a bit too much, for me, I always think of the thief on the cross. There's the story, I don't know if you know the story, you know, Jesus is on the cross between the two thieves, right? The two robbers, actually, they weren't just thieves. These people, they seem to have been very violent people when they stole. And one of them is mocking Jesus, and the other one says, you know, he doesn't. He says, please remember me when you enter your kingdom, right? And Jesus says to him, I tell you, surely, surely, I say to you that today you will be with me in paradise. Right, and it's a story. It's the only deathbed conversion that we sort of get in the Bible. I don't think there's another one in Scripture. But I always think about that in the end, you know, what did that guy know theologically? What did that guy know in terms of philosophy and theology? And what did he have time to settle? The guy was hanging on a cross, and all he did was just say, you know, remember me when you enter into your kingdom. And that was enough. That was apparently enough. So when it gets a bit too much, and I'm talking, I guess, out there, if there's any Christians who feel that doubt is a problem, or even non-Christians, in the end, the Bible, again, in its wisdom, doesn't say, well, you know what, if you're doubting, off you go into the fire, right? Or it says, well, you have to make sure you seal all the gaps in your worldview. Every little problem you have, you got to make sure you got that fixed before you stand before God, before you die. No, it doesn't. For the Bible, what's important is just trust, and you know, we'll figure things out later. That's not to diminish the importance of knowledge in Christianity, but it's to diminish its importance in terms of, you know, if I don't have something figured out, or if something doesn't make sense to me, that's it, everything is lost, or I just should give up the whole enterprise. If that was the case, you know, one of my favorite sayings is that when we die, you know, the people that will go to heaven, all of them will be heretics, every one of them. Because the idea is that, you know, if you're going to stand before God, suddenly your full knowledge of God and all your theology will just fall apart. I mean, you know, what exactly, you know, you know, you got the story of Isaiah, right, in chapter 6 of Isaiah, and Isaiah is in the temple, and he's, I don't know, praying or sweeping the temple, I don't know what he's doing. Suddenly God appears, right? It's worth reading, right? It's really, it's not very long, and it's fascinating. It's one of the what we call the theophanies, right? God appearance. And the first thing Isaiah does is, like, he basically just falls down like he's dead, and he's like, he just cries out and says, you know, I am undone. Literally in Hebrew, I think it means I'm basically dissolved, broken down. And I tend to think, well, you know, we sit sometimes, you know, I've done my fair bit of theology too. We sit there with our little notes and our little, you know, systematic theologies and everything, and then you think, well, you take that and you stand, you know, if you would stand before this God, then suddenly you'd find yourself kind of going, yeah, I didn't understand anything very well anyway, you know. And thankfully, at least in my understanding of theology, in the Reformed understanding of theology, and I think in everybody's understanding of theology, perfect knowledge is not really something that has to do with the eternity of your soul. So a good example is also Thomas, right? He says, after Jesus is crucified, he says, I won't believe. All his friends are saying Jesus rose from the dead. He says, well, unless I see the holes in his hands and his wounds on his flesh, I'm not going to believe. And then Jesus appears and says to Thomas, come and touch my hands. He says, don't be doubtful, he says, but believe, right? Which is kind of weird. He doesn't say don't be doubtful, but go and study and find out. But he says just trust that there's bigger things and things that you won't understand. Trust the fact that there's a whole world out there and a whole dimension that will never make sense to you, and you just have to trust it because you can't, not on this side of it. So that's a big theme in the Bible. It's not so much that hey, let's gain this perfect knowledge that it has zero doubts and zero problems, but rather that you have enough understanding to just say, hey, I trust, and maybe knowledge will come later. So I don't want to discourage anybody who feels doubtful. I want to encourage people, and doubts are good. They're good because they propel you to think, to learn, to engage, and rather than just be complacent. And believe me, there is way too much complacency in modern Christianity, way too much.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I was preaching there for a moment, so I'm sorry. That might not be fitting with the theme, but
it's
I can't avoid it.
Fine. Yeah, it's fine. It is also very interesting to see to know your position, your views on doubts. I think it's and that you're encouraging people to doubt. I think that's great. I also think that in the case of the closest Christian that I know is my mother, and she also she's open about her doubts, but she has some issues in her church because of this, but she's also encouraging people to doubt, and I'm also encouraging her to doubt, not necessarily with the goal of making her change her whole belief system, but for example, with all the metaphors in the Bible, with all of these interpretations, I think that she finds it useful to also reflect on this instead of only believing what a friend tells her about this passage or something. So I told you that here in this server we're interested in understanding why people believe what they believe in, and we also want to show that, for example, in your case, you've explained us how you, as a theist, you reconcile your personal views, your personal views on faith and religion, and also you understand, you see it as compatible with, for example, the scientific work. Or academia, something that maybe for some people is not as clear, or maybe some people will be interested in knowing how has been this in the past. Have you felt that? I don't know how in where you were in academia, how this was. Was it easy, for example, for you to reconcile these two? Were people around you? Knowing that you were a theist, was there some kind of, I don't know, how was the interaction in this aspect? If you want to tell us, of course.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, my academic career is long dead, so I'm not going to lose anything here. So you need to remember what period of time I was in academia, and that was really from the late 90s to sort of the 2010s, 2008, towards the end of the first decade of the 2000s, right? So that was really the time when I was in research in that world. The reality is, and I know this might come as a surprise to people, is most people in research, in most scientists, don't seem to care much. It's not like we sit there doing Western blots or cell cultures and discuss, and we sit there having these sort of discussions about God and science. Most people really just don't care, right? It's very rare that people would do that. Secondly, you need to remember, religious conversations, it's a workplace, right? So often, people are very reluctant to have religious conversations. Thirdly, I was in the UK for most of it, and the UK is notorious for being very apathetic and very, very reserved when it comes to talking about anything but the weather, football. But religious conversations are just a big no-no there. Right? It's a great way to be ostracized and to be seen as weird and everything. I did, however, have occasionally some conversations with people, and the vast majority of them were negative, were very negative. For most people, being you say you go into church on Sunday, and they kind of look at, okay, whatever, it's just, they won't delve into it. They're not going to come and ask you, well, how do you reconcile, you just published a paper, how can you on earth reconcile, this sort of like going to church and listening. You find in the scientific world, you would find the same kind of attitude that was in the world at the time. So this was really the time when this movement of what we call the new atheists was beginning. Dawkins, Harris, Dennett, and Hitchens, right? So, Christopher Hitchens, the late Christopher Hitchens, right? And all of them had different angles as to, why God doesn't exist and why religion is garbage and all that kind of stuff. And, as human beings, we never come to something neutrally, right? This whole idea of tabula rasa doesn't exist, right? We always come with our own presuppositions and our biases to things, and it takes work to unravel that. So when these guys appeared on the stage and they were given a big platform and they made a lot of money, all of them, they gave voice to many people who just, it wasn't so much that many scientists who didn't really see religion as a problem, but they just wanted to dismiss it altogether, because it wasn't that they had any argument against God. It's just that it just doesn't help with the enterprise of making a better world through science, right? A lot of the noise from the creation evolution debate was huge back then. So if you were a Christian, then you were either an idiot or an unscientific idiot, or you were basically you hadn't thought about things very carefully, because how can you be a Christian? And one interesting conversation I had at the time was when I was doing my postdoc. And I remember Alistair McGrath had come to the university where I was to speak. Alistair McGrath is still a theologian. I think he's from Ireland, and he wrote a book called The Dawkins Delusion, responding to the God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. So this is now 2006, 7, 8 there, right? And as a response on that, he was being invited to various universities. He's an academic himself, and he was invited to various universities to give talks about his views. And I remember he was coming to the university where I was. So me and my lab were having breakfast in the morning, because labs do that. And I mentioned this. I said, well, this guy is coming over to speak at the law department. I remember I had to go over, and one of the people there, one of the leads and the leaders of the lab, just kind of scoffed about it, just laughed, and he said, and I can't remember the exact conversation, but he said, we don't believe in God, and I was like, wow, how surprising, like I hadn't noticed, and he said, well, we don't believe in God because we don't need him anymore. Which is a very interesting claim. So what this person was really saying, and this wasn't a person who had sat down to think about this very deeply. I mean, it's just basically, I think they just kind of found an argument on the internet and that was it. But basically what they said was, we don't need God anymore. And it was the first time I was exposed to the God of the gaps argument, right? Because that's what he was really saying. For all the things that are important for us and meaningful, we don't need God. Like, we don't need God to explain how the world came to be. We don't need God to have a foundation of morality. It's something that I think that both Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris would disagree heavily on. The sort of the concept of God is a very important foundation for the building of morality. But he just kind of was very dismissive about this. And I remember it was the moment where I thought, this isn't going anywhere. I mean, basically, these people will wake up in the morning and go through life without actually casting a second thought about the biggest question in the world, right? But this was the time when academia was so inundated by the rise of these new atheists and all this kind of stuff, that basically being a Christian was basically you're an idiot. And I know some academics who were passed up for promotion or missed out on tenure because they felt, their department heads knew that they were religious, but not necessarily Christians, other religions too. And they were just passed up because, we can't have a professor who believes in God. I mean, come on, that's nonsense. The most I ever had was, so my website, the Upturn Microscope, it used to be a blog before it became a webcomic. And many of the articles are still there. I think they're still there. And back then, it was just me wrestling with the Bible and just kind of writing these Bible studies and just pouring my brain out on that. And I had a lot of these religious articles there. And some people still get concerned or surprised when they find those on the website, although I don't have that much traffic anymore. And I remember my PI during my postdoc who told me once, she said, well, if I was going to be applying for other jobs, I said, well, you might want to delete your website, right? Because you don't want, it's going to really affect your chances of getting a job. I find that funny now because my chances were zero anyway. Even if I was a hardcore atheist, my chances would still be zero because, like I said in the beginning of this, I wasn't a particularly good researcher. And I'm thankful enough to have gotten to the point to do a postdoc, but science is it's done very well without me. It doesn't need me. But anyway, she felt that this was a problem, right? That you can't have these explicit articles with Bible verses and everything in there, and then go and apply for a job in the life sciences. My goodness, they'll eat you alive. This was this was really the atmosphere at the time. I would like to think that things have changed, that people are a bit more open to discuss, that the question of God has gained a bit more credibility now and is a bit more, it's worth discussing and not dismissed. But, I still work in academia and let's just say I haven't seen ample evidence of that. But I think as generations change and the old guard kind of goes away, my generation kind of passes away because we were caught in that sort of religious, that kind of debate, the new atheists and all that. I think the question of the compatibility of faith and reason, or faith and science, or religion and science, I think might actually take a new nuance, because I think the next generations are thinking about things very differently, and their epistemology is a little bit different to ours. Ours was kind of the last gasp, the death gasp of hardcore modernity, hardcore sort of like classical empirical materialism, that kind of thing. If you're a scientist, you're just this kind of like, put together person who just doesn't listen to fairy tales. I think the next generations might be a little bit more open, and the discussions might be a little bit better. So yeah, when we're out, hopefully the people are coming after us, the millennials and such, might actually be a little bit more open. And this thing needs discussion, man. This thing needs conversation. You can't do it by yourself. It needs engagement. So I'm all for that.
Yeah, and
I talk so much. Yeah,
it's fine. Yeah, one of the reasons why I'm doing this is specifically for that, because I think that there are certain stereotypes still from that time. Now you're mentioning that, yeah, maybe more conversation is needed, and I agree with you. More conversation is needed, but also some examples that challenge such stereotypes, I think, that are also needed. Yeah, because that had happened to me. I don't believe in a deity, and I maybe not as strong as you are describing, but I had my prejudices, one could say, when I was doing my master's, until I started finding people that are theists and that are very good scientists and that can do their job even better than I can do my job. So that more or less like made me more empathetic. And also this person told me, she confessed basically that she was a Christian to me, and she said, I cannot tell this to my professors, because exactly what your PI was telling you, that she knew that that would affect her career. So she's not saying this, and I was surprised by that, and also made me realize, okay, there may be more people in this situation that are not open about this, and it doesn't sound fair to me that this is the case. And yeah, this in this server, for example, there's the debate, or maybe the question, whether there's an agenda behind the street epistemology. And we have a conversation on Sundays in the Spanish section, and I asked them, the participants, whether they think that there's an agenda here. And some of them suggested that there is one. Some of us, like myself, I tried, like, I might have an agenda. I guess I am biased, but I've tried to be at least aware of what is the agenda that I have, and try to, like, okay, I don't want to have one, basically. Like, being aware, I guess, is the first step to, like, okay, maybe I'm pushing too much in one direction or not. So yeah, like, I guess that not having an agenda also helps conversations to continue. Like, for example, I am open about, for example, if I know that religion is giving a person certain stability, mental health, social interactions, I would not, ethically speaking, I would not get that from them, like get that religion away from them, if I don't have anything else to offer that fills all of that. And this is, for example, the case of my mom. She is older than I am. She has issues. She's an introvert, so she has issues finding friends. And she has a great community to share with. And yeah, when you mentioned doubt, I'm so happy that she has certain doubts, because, for example, with the pandemic and what the church was telling her to do, she was like, I'm not going to the service this Sunday, it's too early. Like, all of those things, like, I think are healthy enough. Certain doubt, certain reflection, certain own, like, yeah, your own, how would I say it? Like, yeah, you putting your own interpretation there is good. And yeah, that's why what I want to encourage as much as I can here or around me. And yeah, I don't know if you have questions for me or about the server. You're very welcome. I know you told me that you have been seeing a bit more about this, but yeah, you're very welcome to continue here in the server. But yeah, do you have any questions for me?
Do you have an agenda?
Well, I think that my agenda varies. For example, now, I'm a discussion facilitator here in the server, and I've noticed that there are some theists that say that the server is not welcoming theists. So I asked, or I listened, okay, what is going on? And I guess, yes, I was ignoring some comments. I was ignoring maybe the way that people were communicating to theists, and this made me realize, okay, there might be some, I guess I explained to you, maybe it's because the majority of the users here are atheists, that this dynamics, or this is what happens. So yeah, I guess my agenda now is, okay, I have a stereotype that I want to challenge, and we'll see how that goes.
I mean, it's understandable, because if you make a group that is basically for discussing worldviews, I think that most people in the West today would be non-theists, right? Either agnostics or atheists. I think that's what the numbers show, right? In the West specifically, right? Now, I don't think across the world. There is an appeal to atheism. I've never been an atheist, right? I've come close sometimes, but I've never been an atheist, and I can't bring myself to not believe in God, which is a whole other thing in itself, and maybe that's a topic for another discussion one day. But there's a sense of, in the world we live in, there's a sense of rebellion in it, right? There's a sense of freeing yourself from the shackles of religion. Let's face it, we haven't had 2,000 years of atheism, and now we finally discovered God. That's not what's happened. The reverse is happening, right? So for many people, atheism is a very, at least on its face, right, is a very freeing worldview, right? It's a very freeing worldview. Almost even like things like nihilism is actually can be very freeing, because what they do is you look at the world, and today we know that the world is so complex because we've got the internet, right? So you can see so much more than you could, back when I was a child, you can see so much now, and you can be exposed and engaged so much with things. You look at it, and it's just so much easier, especially if you're, depending on your makeup. It is easier to just say no. It's like the Gordian knot, like Alexander the Great just kind of chops through it and just says there isn't. So there's that element of rebellion in it, and I think when people feel like that, they tend to join servers and communities and things to actually join together. And also, there's still, atheism is still, even though it's a lot more widespread than people realize, I think that it's also persecuted a little bit in most places. Like, there's still strongholds, obviously of religion across the world. And if you're an atheist, you might feel quite alone. So an online community is somewhere you want to go. But yeah, you tend to be vocal because it is a rebellion. It's not the same thing as being a Christian. Being a Christian is boring, right? In terms of, culture. Yeah, so you're a Christian. Yeah, there's nothing new there. But being an atheist, you feel like this, you've discovered this freedom of it. And you want to obviously talk about and discuss it because, like you talked about your mom, we are tribal beings, right? We want to be in an in-group. We want to be part of that. So that's why I think maybe your group has attracted more, or groups like these attract more atheists. Boring Christians like myself don't want to go into these groups and talk about what I think everybody already knows, right? I don't feel the need to do that, right? But, maybe atheists feel that they've found, hey, let's free ourselves from all this kind of stuff, and there's this excitement in there. Or I might be completely wrong. I'm not an expert on internet communities, but I think there's that element in there. Definitely, there's this kind of sense of my destiny is my own if I'm an atheist. There's other things obviously that become problems later on, but at its face, the problems to deal with and debate. But there's at its face, it can be quite freeing, especially coming out of a world that is a history in the West, especially that is so heavily Judeo-Christian in its morality and its ethics. So, sorry, I was supposed to ask you a question about the server, but I do actually have a question. What would you like to see in the server happening in the future in this community? How would you like to see it evolve?
Thanks for that question. Yeah, so for example, regarding my interaction with my mom, for example, like when I was before being as open-minded as I am now, before using SE basically, the interaction with my mom and with her beliefs was having a discussion was difficult. But for example, now with SE, whenever she has a claim, I try to genuinely understand, okay, what does she mean by this? In a non-confrontational way. So maybe I can give you an example. So once she was seeing in television that there was a politician in a church, and these people in the church were telling him what his future was going to be, and my mom was like, "That's not biblical. That's not from God." And I asked her, "Okay, why? Why do you think that is being in television is not God's word?" And she explained to me, I don't know the passages in the Bible, but she said something in the lines of, God would first reveal to her while she's praying something about her future. Like, for example, I don't know, my daughter is going abroad to study. But that would be revealed in secret by God to her, and then will be confirmed by somebody else externally. So these two things need to happen for her to be sure that this is not something diabolical or from the demon or something, but it's genuinely coming from God. And this is the epistemology that she uses to discover whether is this fortune telling or this is really God revealing the future to her. And yeah, like, and I'm okay with that. That's her explanation. That's how she come up with such a belief. And there are many other examples. I could go on. Now the conversations are more like this. And yeah, like I stopped. Like I know I cannot give her something in that could take the place of what the religion is giving her. And I also in the server mostly in the Spanish section, I've been like, for example, with the pandemic, with how the circumstances have been, she has benefited greatly of her community. She knows in the church, like, and she has also some Bible studies. So she knows doctors, lawyers. She knows people from different profiles, and also her. And yeah, right now where I live, where I'm from, the situation is really bad. So she's also helping others to find oximeters, to find oxygen tanks, to find like, yeah, the ICUs are packed. So how to deal with, for example, low levels of oxygen at home. Like she already knows all of these things, and she's constantly talking. And yeah, the excuse is we're going to pray for the members of our family that are that are sick. So every day she's calling. She has a list of names, and she's calling and asking. And that's her excuse, like, yeah, praying, but she's also really actively helping, and she's also receiving a lot of help. So, for example, I'm like, as an atheist, as I am, such community with such cohesion, with such willingness to help, I honestly do not have. Like the closest thing that I have is this server, like, and I'm trying to, yeah, promote, interactions like this or like others, and I see, like I like to see that people like honestly see that, yeah, of course religion can have some, like everything could have some downsides, but to recognize also from an evolutionary point of view, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It has evolved as well. It changes, it mutates, some doctrines disappear, some cults disappear, but it remains, it still, there's some religions still with us. So I see also a benefit. They adapt to circumstances. So yeah, I guess that's what I would like to see in the server is maybe a more open view of religion. I don't think that religion necessarily needs to disappear. I think that having, for example, doubt, being encouraged, it's something healthy in many ways, not only in religion, also in among atheists. I think that's something that I would like to see as well. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
No, it sounds like you have a very good vision for it, because a lot of these communities, they start off, and it's good to have these discussions, but then they change very rapidly. Like you said, the rate of mutation is very, very fast, very rapid, and and it's good to know that there's an overarching kind of objective, like something that you at least would like to see happening, because that means it guides the way you act and moderate and behave in the community. So that's all, rather than we'll just open up this platform for people to just talk and see where it goes. That's actually good, and I think it's a very noble thing that you're doing. I think that's a very noble thing. There isn't much space in the world today for discussions like this to be made in a non-intimidating and non-threatening manner. So to aim for that, for me, is very noble. It's very noble. Yeah, all of us have a certain worldview. All of us, every single person out there, right? My kids have worldviews, and they're like 1 and 4, right? And I can tell you that they have a certain sense of the world, which is amusing to listen to. We all want, and this is a heavily ingrained impulse in us, we all want that worldview to be correct, right? We all want that. And to be correct, because we're social creatures and we're tribalistic, we need other people to believe that too, right? We need that. And that's the natural impulse, right? The way I see the world, the way I make sense of reality, that's how I like to say it. The way I make sense of reality, my narrative of reality, needs to become other people's narrative. If it's not, then I feel threatened and insecure, right? So, and you know very well that human beings, when they feel threatened and insecure, don't exactly act in the most civil manner, right? So I think that's where that comes from, this desperate need. You know, when it comes to the question of God, heaven, hell, death, meaning of life, essentially that's what this is about, right? You know, why are we here? These are the big questions, and surprising, but it shouldn't be surprising that, you know, people have very strong opinions about it, very strong views, because not so much because, oh, you know, we've all met God and we know that he's there, or because, oh, we absolutely know that God is not there. It's more because often it's driven by the fact that, you know, I really want what I believe to be correct, and that's how I make sense of the world. And if you take away the foundation of it, which is the existence or non-existence of God, then, well, things fall apart. And we're embodied creatures, to quote Jordan Peterson again. We're embodied. We're not just, we're not computers. No matter how much the rationalists try to pretend that, you know, we're just computers. We're not computers. We are embodied beings. We feel things. So when I feel threatened, when, you know, when I'm having this discussion, I'm not disengaged. I'm not Spock, right? I'm not disengaged from this emotionally. So it's very difficult to hold conversations, like to have a community whose purpose is to have this kind of conversation and at the same time do it in a manner that is, you know, some crusade of group A against group B, or another crusade from group B against group A. It's very it's dangerous, difficult. But I think, you know, from what I saw from the conversations, and I read some of the things, I think people are very open. And I think the reason is because they feel that this is a community where they can actually enrich their opinions. They come, again, to quote Vervaeke and Peterson, that was a very good conversation. You need to be psychedelics to follow it, but I mean, it's pretty good. You know, there's these two concepts in ancient Greek, right? Philosophia and philonikia, right? And the philosophia is this idea that you're pursuing wisdom, truth, right? And that's the kind of conversation you want to have. Philonikia is the pursuit of winning, right? It's the love of winning. So I'm in it to win. And I think we've all had conversations with people who either embody one or the other, right? I mean, you can tell the difference. You can tell the difference between two people talking, trying to enrich each other and trying to learn from each other and even be challenged by each other, and people talking just so they can win the conversation, right? I think you can follow any political debate. That's where you see this example of philonikia. And I think in the server, from what it looks to me, it looks like people are in it because, yeah, they've got views, they've got ideas, but they've got the necessary humility to say, you know what? I shouldn't just trust the fact that I know everything. Because I think that God exists or doesn't exist doesn't mean that I've got it all figured out. And that's a very healthy approach to humanity, to basically living. That's a healthy approach, and it can bear a lot of fruit. And I wish, honestly, that a lot of people were like that. I'll say it, I wish that a lot of Christians were like that, a lot more open to have meaningful conversations like that. Often, you know, when Christians, and I put myself in this too, we have conversations, it's always that, yeah, I'll listen to you, but in the end I just want to sort of evangelize you and slap you with some verses and things. And, you know, maybe we need to be a bit more human. After 2,000 years, I think we might need to be a bit more human in our engagement rather than, you know, salesmen in our engagement. And if there's any Christians in there listening, you listen to that, right? So, yeah, I think that this is a very good effort, and I think that you're doing very well. You will have hiccups, definitely, it happens. People don't like to have their you know, axioms poked, like Peterson used to say, right? They don't like to be poked in the axioms. And, you know, it's going to happen, but I think it's good to create this space, and I think you're doing a very good job in it.
Yeah, thanks for your time. Thanks for the interview. Yeah, you're very welcome to enjoy more of the server. And yeah, if you want to contact me again or I don't know if I could. Yeah, there were some very interesting topics that we did not discuss, but yeah, I would like to continue more of these type of events. So I guess I'll contact you for something similar maybe in the future. Yes. So thanks, and I hope that you have a wonderful evening, afternoon, still. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Well, thank you very much for having me over. I really enjoyed it. I apologize if I came on a bit too strong or I talked way too much. I hope I didn't give people a headache. But I hope that if I said anything, I hope that it was meaningful and enriched the conversation rather than subtracted from it. So thank you again for having me over. And yeah, I would love to do this again. We haven't even talked about psychology and Jung, which are two of my favorite topics, and I try to leave out a lot. Okay then.
Yeah, okay. So for next time.
Next time. All right.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.